The formation holds its breath, even the fluorescent light seemed to dim, as if the building itself recognizes the fracture line slicing through the moment. The faint hum of the HVAC becomes unnaturally loud. Dust motes hover midair like suspended shrapnel. Kendall doesn't move. Her posture remains parade-dressed, but her forearms angle just enough for the ink to remain visible. The coordinates sit there black, precise, uncompromising. She doesn't hide them, doesn't defend them, doesn't explain. She simply exists with them, as though they are a living part of her skin. Captain Reeves's throat works in a tight swallow. His pupils dilate, then constrict. A barely perceptible tremor ripples through his right hand, the one he once used to steady a sniper's heartbeat at 700 yards. His index finger twitches against his thigh, an involuntary admission of memory. Something fractures behind his sternum. Kendall watches the exact moment the past hits him like a blast wave. Paul shifts his weight, the rubber sole of his boot scraping the concrete, with a weak whisper. His eyes flick to Kendall, then to the tattoo, then back to Reeves. His jaw slackens. A tiny muscle near the corner of his mouth spasms, fear disguised as confusion. His bravado, usually so loud, empties out of him like air from a punctured canister. His friends try to become invisible. One presses his back flat against the cinderblock wall. Another tucks his chin as though bracing for impact. Their shoulders draw inward, forming a collapsing perimeter around their guilt. Reeves steps closer. Not aggressively, something worse, controlled, measured, the kind of movement a man makes when approaching an IED he personally buried years ago. He stops inches from Kendall's forearm. He doesn't touch her, he's afraid to. Instead, he studies the ink with a reverence usually reserved for folded flags and dog tags returned in silence. His breath hitches, half inhale, half regret. His jaw flexes until a vein pulses starkly along his temple. Those coordinates. His voice frays on the edges, like a transmission breaking through static. They shouldn't exist, not outside ASCIF, not outside black cell documentation. Kendall's face remains unreadable, her lashes don't flicker. Her chest rises and falls in the controlled rhythm of someone who has trained herself not to react to the reactions of others. In her gaze, however, just beneath the surface something shifts. A flash of memory, a shadow passing behind her irises. Pain held so long it has calcified. Reeves inhales sharply, as though the weight of the numbers presses against his diaphragm. Where? He attempts again, but the question splinters. Where did you get those coordinates? Kendall's response is silence, not defiance, precision. She gives him exactly nothing, and the absence feels louder than a confession. A heavy stillness spreads across the room. Even Paul senses the shift now. He straightens his spine with a jerky motion, like his body is unsure whether to stand at attention or flee. Sweat gathers at his hairline. He wipes it too quickly, too forcefully, an admission of panic. Reeves's eyes narrow. He's not looking at Kendall anymore. He's looking through her, into a place only Tier 1 operators and ghosts ever visit. His nostrils flare. His shoulders lift with a breath that sounds more like a man preparing for a funeral than a briefing. Finally, he tears his gaze from the tattoo. When he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of a classified after-action report. But to understand this moment, his jaw locks, the muscle ticking like a metronome. We need to go back 3 weeks. Kendall doesn't blink, she waits. Paul does blink, rapid, nervous, like his body is trying to erase the last 60 seconds from reality. Reeves turns toward the cadets. His boots strike the floor with deliberate precision, each impact a warning shot. 3 weeks, he repeats, as if the phrase itself is a detonation code. Kendall lowers her eyes, not out of submission, but calculation. The countdown has begun. Kendall steps through the glass doors of the Naval Special Warfare Training Center at 04:45, the building still holding the dense pre-dawn cold. The fluorescent lights hum overhead as she crosses the lobby, her boots making no more sound than a controlled exhale. She signs the logbook with a steady hand. K. Morrison, civilian contractor, tactical assessment. No rank, no unit, nothing to hint at the truth. Her signature is neat, compact, the handwriting of someone trained to leave no necessary trace. The duty watch officer barely glances up. She prefers it that way. Kendall's expression remains neutral as she clips her badge onto her belt. Her gaze sweeps the entrance in a quiet sector scan habit, not paranoid. A barely noticeable tightening of her shoulders occurs, and she registers exits, angles, blind corners. Her breathing stays even, but there's a certain depth to her inhale, the kind that comes from years of living in red phase readiness. At the cadets' barracks, Paul is already holding court. He stretches theatrically, arms raised overhead, chest puffed out. The motion is too wide, to deliberate design for an audience, not efficiency. A sleepy laugh from another cadet feeds him. He thrives on attention the way some men crave oxygen. His grin is boyish, polished, the grin of someone who's never been told no and never had to earn yes. His jaw clenches for a fraction of a second when he catches sight of his reflection in the metal locker door. He adjusts his hair, smoothing it with a practice swipe. The tick in his cheek betrays the stress he would never acknowledge. He likes control specifically, control of perception. Gonna smoke the course today, Paul says, voice still rough with sleep but dripping with certainty. Officers track Love's initiative. A cadet nods too quickly, eager. Another glances away, jaw tight, as though the bravado grates against something in him. Kendall moves to the observation deck above the training grounds. The cold wind slices across her face, lifting strands of hair that escaped her neat braid. She doesn't react to the temperature. Her notebook opens with a soft snap, and she begins writing. Her notes aren't narrative, they're technical, clinical. HRV spike during anaerobic intervals, compensatory mechanics at shoulder joint. Cognitive lag during stress-stimulus transitions, she measures them without judgment. Data tells the truth even when people don't. Below, the morning PT is underway. Cadets heave themselves over obstacles, their breaths forming vapor clouds in the chilled air. The instructor cadre bellows commands that echo across the asphalt. Paul takes off at the starting signal with too much speed unsustainable, Kendall notes. He treats the obstacle course like a sprint, not a strategic sequence. But his body, engineered by genetics and privilege, keeps him upright through sheer muscular momentum. He clears the rope climb in seconds. Soldiers nearby glance at each other. Even they have to acknowledge the athleticism. When he lands, he grins wide, triumphant, sharpened by ego. A woman finished third. Her breathing is steady, recovery controlled. Kendall marks this down, good autoregulation. Paul wipes sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Instead of focusing on his own performance metrics, he turns toward the woman. Maybe try a yoga class instead, sweetheart, he says loudly, just enough for the instructors to hear but not enough to seem overtly insubordinate. The woman tightens her jaw, her nostrils flare, but she keeps moving, professional, disciplined. She won't give him the reaction he wants. Kendall's pencil pauses mid-stroke. She flips to another page without looking down. A single note, behavioral red flag. From the deck below, Chief Warrant Officer Hayes stands with arms crossed, eyes narrowed beneath his cap. He's old-school team scar tissue under the uniform, experience etched into the lines around his eyes. His gaze travels up to the observation platform. Kendall stands perfectly still, weight balanced evenly, posture neither rigid nor relaxed, just efficient. Her movements are precise, economical. There's no wasted rotation in her neck as she surveys the course. Her eyes track multiple cadets simultaneously. Hayes notices the faint tightening at the corner of her right eye, the micro-adjustment of someone running silent threat assessments. That civilian contractor, Hayes mutters to the instructor beside him. He scratches the side of his jaw, eyes never leaving her silhouette. She moves like one of us. The other instructor follows his gaze, squinting. Contractor, huh? Hayes's lips press into a thin line. Contractors don't stand like that. Kendall closes her notebook softly, as if sealing classified data. She turns, expression unreadable, and walks along the deck with the fluid gait of someone who's spent years moving under night vision goggles. Hayes watches every step. Week 1 settles over the training center like a low-pressure system, dense and quiet, carrying the weight of routines that are anything but ordinary. Kendall arrives before dawn, her boots hitting the gravel with a soft, rhythmic cadence. The sky is still dark when she receives her assignment: evaluate a live-fire tactical course, full-spectrum assessment, no external oversight. She nods once, accepting the clipboard without comment. Her eyes track the range from a distance, noting wind flags, soil moisture, light conditions. All of it matters. Paul steps forward before anyone else can. "My squad volunteers," he announces, voice pitched just loud enough to dominate the small crowd. He flashes a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. The corners of his lips twitch upward but strain at the edges, forced confidence wrapped in youthful arrogance. That night, long after taps, Paul slips into the simulator control room. He moves quickly, but not quietly. He's not used to needing subtlety. The glow of monitors paints his face pale as he inputs unauthorized commands. Wind speed variables spike, moving target trajectories shift by fractional degrees. Environmental drift algorithms skew just enough to distort the assessment output. Not enough to trigger system alerts, not enough to look malicious. Just enough to make Kendall's performance metrics appear flawed. He leans back, eyes flicking across the screen. A small grin pulls at his mouth tight, triumphant, the grin of a man convinced he's smarter than the system. He wipes a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He doesn't notice the tremor in his fingers. The next morning, Kendall stands before the terminal at 05 to 7 hours. Her notebook rests beside her, open to a blank page. She scrolls through the simulation logs, her pupils contract sharply at the anomaly spike. Her thumb pauses above the trackpad. 3 full seconds of silence. Her breathing remains steady, but the smallest exhale escapes her nose, a release of calculation, not surprise. Her jaw shifts a millimeter to the left, a micro-adjustment she makes when storing information, not reacting to it. She doesn't call IT, doesn't raise a flag. Instead, she pulls the system offline. By 0534, she begins manual recalibration. She tests each wind sensor individually, comparing output against barometric readings from a handheld Kestrel. She cross-references target distance values with laser rangefinders. Her handwriting fills the notebook with dense technical shorthand. She bypasses the corrupted baseline algorithm entirely and rebuilds the assessment protocol from the ground up, clean, uncompromised, elegant. By 0600, she stands beside the range, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Her equipment hums with precision. Paul's squad lines up, some looking excited, others nervous. Paul watches Kendall with a smirk, chin lifted slightly, shoulders loose. Too loose, as if he expects the script to unfold in his favor. The course begins. Live rounds crack across the compound. Metal targets clang under impact. Kendall monitors every sensor readout, her fingers moving with the efficient stillness of someone accustomed to multitasking under fire. Her eyes dart between data streams, catching microfluctuations in recoil patterns and movement vectors. The output on her tablet stabilizes in perfect alignment, more accurate than the bases on archival benchmarks. When the final target drops, Paul stands at the sidelines, waiting for her numbers to fracture. But the data holds, strong, precise, untouchable. His jaw tightens. The muscle near his temple throbs once, then again. Lucky guess, he mutters, too low for most to hear, but not low enough to hide the frustration grinding his molars. Chief Warrant Officer Hayes watches him, then turns his stare to Kendall. The lines around his eyes deepen. Something isn't adding up. After the squad clears the range, Hayes steps in front of Kendall, blocking her exit. His posture is relaxed, but his eyes are sharp, probing. He keeps his voice low, controlled. That simulation was tampered with, he says. Not a question, a conclusion. Kendall meets his gaze. Her eyelids lower slightly, the faintest flicker of acknowledgement but not confession. The data spoke for itself. Chief, Hayes studies her silently. His eyes trace the faint scar above her left eyebrow, clean, thin mark, the kind that comes from a metal corner in a dark hallway or shrapnel that missed critical bone by millimeters. He notes the calluses along her palms and knuckles, not the kind from gym work but from years handling weapons and ropes under real-world conditions. He lifts his chin slightly. Who are you really? Morrison. Kendall's expression remains perfectly composed. Her breathing stays level. One slow blink, she doesn't answer. The silence between them stretches, heavy, deliberate, like a classified file locked behind a red door. Kendall worked through the night with a precision that bordered on surgical. The walls of her temporary quarters disappeared beneath layers of field diagrams, topographic maps, and annotated behavioral response charts. Red string-connected extraction choke points. Blue markers circled terrain features optimal for concealment. Black notes detailed stress inoculation phases normally reserved for Tier 1 pipelines. The overhead light flickered each time the HVAC kicked in, casting sharp shadows across her face. She ignored it. Her pupils stayed fixed, micro-adjusting as she reviewed decades of global SEER failures and the psychological markers that predicted student collapse. Her fingertips moved fast over the keyboard, no hesitation, no redundant keystrokes. Her posture never sagged. Fatigue would have forced a normal contractor to lean back, stretch, roll their shoulders. Kendall remained still, controlled, the kind of quiet endurance that came from missions where movement meant detection, and detection meant death. Paul, meanwhile, held court in the mess hall. He leaned back in his chair, boots crossed at the ankles, retelling a rehearsed story about his classified internship in DC. His audience, to younger cadets, nodded along even though they didn't understand half the jargon he misused. When news arrived that Kendall had been tasked with redesigning the SEER protocol, Paul's smile widened. A short exhale through his nose, almost a snort, punctuated the moment. His eyes sharpened with the pleased anticipation of someone expecting a public failure he could capitalize on. "Tau Point lady's going to drown," he whispered, tapping one finger idly against his cup, an unconscious rhythm of arrogance. That Kendall didn't drown, she kept working. By the second night, her breathing had grown taut and shallow, controlled in the same way operators regulate breaths before a breach. Her jaw tightened when she encountered logistical constraints. She didn't curse, didn't sigh, didn't waste energy. She simply recalculated. The clock read 0317 when she began integrating real-world evasion contours, routes that had been used by teams under her command, routes only someone with operational authority could possibly know. At 0655 on day 3, she stepped into the briefing room. No theatrics, just a slim binder tucked under one arm. Her hair was tied back in a practical knot, the simplicity contrasting sharply with the complexity of the material she carried. The officers shuffled into their seats. Chief Hayes stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes locked onto her like he was waiting for a breach charge to detonate. Kendall placed the binder on the conference table. The quiet thud cut through the room. She began presenting with the same calm precision she used in the field. 12 scenario modifications, progressive escalation patterns, environmental stress layering, cognitive load interference, psychological degradation metrics updated to modern interrogation techniques used by hostile state actors. She described them clinically, her voice steady but edged with something deeper, a history she wasn't sharing. When she outlined the final extraction phase, Commander Jacobson's brows drew together. A pulse of recognition flashed in his eyes, the kind that comes from seeing something he wasn't supposed to see again. His foot stilled mid-tap beneath the table. His fingers tightened around a pen until the plastic creaked. "This methodology," he finally said, leaning forward. "It's based on the Pongier Valley extraction protocols." A pause. The air held. "That operation is classified, highly classified." "How do you?" Kendall didn't let him finish. "Publicly available research, sir." "Open source intelligence analysis," she replied, tone neutral, gaze steady. "Not defensive controlled." Her micro-expression didn't betray even a flicker of anxiety. Her breathing didn't hitch, not a single tell. Commander Jacobson's nostrils flared. He didn't believe her. Hayes watched him realize he couldn't challenge her without revealing more classified information himself. "Protocol approved," Jacobson said at last, though his voice carried the tightness of a man unsettled. Kendall inclined her head once, no smile, no satisfaction. She simply gathered her binder and stepped back. From the corner of the room, Paul glared at her with the rigid jaw of a man whose self-image had taken a hit. His fingers curled around the edge of his chair until the knuckles whitened. His stare followed her as she walked out, a simmering resentment sharpening into something darker. She felt it, she didn't show it. The barracks were quiet at 2,300 hours. Lights dimmed, hallways empty. The soft hum of ventilation the only sound accompanying Kendall as she stepped out into the cool night air. The moon hung low, casting a muted silver over the concrete. She pulled her coat tighter, the fabric brushing against the edge of the holster at her hip. Every movement was deliberate, economical, silent reconnaissance in civilian guise. Her boots scuffed the asphalt only once, then silence reclaimed the air. Her phone vibrated against her palm. She glanced at the screen, recognized the incoming encrypted lie, and answered. "Actual, this is Phantom 6, she said, voice dropping into operational cadence, a measured timbre that carried authority beyond the confines of any contractor designation. "Confirm. Surveillance protocol remains active. Assessment phase extends another 10 days, no compromise detected." The words float effortlessly, each syllable precise, but her eyes scanned the periphery. Shadows clung to the edges of the compound. Nothing moved without her registering it. The faint flex of her hand around the phone, the micro shift of her weight from one boot to the other, told the story of someone simultaneously present and detached, a predator in professional mode. From the darkness near the officer's mess, Paul's form shifted. He had been returning from the late dinner, boots crunching softly over gravel. He froze when he heard her voice. His eyes widened imperceptibly at the designation Phantom 6, pupils dilating to absorb the implication. That was no contractor language. That was operational. Tier 1. He stepped closer, keeping to shadowed periphery, muscles tensed in silent calculation. He wanted to close the distance but not reveal himself, every step measured, controlled. A single bead of sweat traced the side of his temple, glinting in the moonlight. He swiped it away nervously, thumb brushing too fast over his jaw, an unconscious admission of apprehension. Kendall ended the call and tucked the device into an inner pocket of her coat. She turned in a slow, fluid motion, scanning the immediate perimeter. Her eyes, trained to detect irregularities at 20 meters in near darkness, locked onto Paul's silhouette. The tilt of his head, the stiff angle of his shoulders, the micro-tick at his right eye. He was calculating, reassessing, caught between disbelief and ambition. For 3 seconds, they maintained eye contact across the expanse of asphalt and shadow. In that instant, the night air thickened. She read him like a book of operational profiles, risk appetite, opportunistic tendencies, impatience masked as confidence. Paul's lips parted, nearly forming words he would never speak aloud, his mind working through variables far beyond the perception of anyone else in the compound. Her gaze never faltered, no muscle twitched. Not her jaw, not the corner of her eye, not her grip on the pocketed phone. Every exhalation was controlled, every blink deliberate. She carried the calm of someone accustomed to moments that could decide life or death, the quiet patience of someone who had waited longer, seen more, and acted only when advantage was guaranteed. Paul broke first, his back straightened in a sharp, almost imperceptible motion. He retreated toward the shadowed tree line, each step deliberate, but hurried enough to suggest retreat without surrender. His mind raced, plotting the next move, calculating the tactical advantage of the coming day. The night had revealed a truth he hadn't anticipated, and yet it had only sharpened his intent. Kendall exhaled slowly through her nose, the faintest release of pressure. Her eyes swept the perimeter once more before she returned inside the barracks, leaving the cold night and the shadowed figure of Paul behind. In the silence that followed, the only movement was the faint shiver of the wind across the asphalt, carrying with it the promise of confrontation yet to come. The sun had barely risen over the training compound, yet the air vibrated with the low hum of anticipation. Week 3's live-fire exercise was underway, each element orchestrated to replicate the stress of a real-world hostage rescue. Cadets moved with calculated precision, each footfall measured, each weapon index aligned to the strictest safety protocols. Sensors tracked trajectories, instructors monitored heart rate variability, stress markers, and reaction times. The simulation was flawless on paper. Paul's squad assembled at the start line, muscles taut, eyes scanning the mock building ahead. Paul's expression was a practiced mask of focus, but subtle tells betrayed his inner calculation, a slight tightening of the jaw, a half lift of one eyebrow, the faint tick in his left eye that flared whenever he sensed opportunity. He relished the idea of control, the ability to manipulate the sequence, to see Kendall fail. He issued the command to breach 30 seconds early, altering the exercise's carefully calculated timing. The cadets hesitated for a split second, a hesitation that was all it took. Martinez, Jr. and Eager surged forward into the corridor. The corridor was a funnel, narrow, restrictive, with live rounds traversing its axis. The ricochet sounded like metal on bone. Instinctive reactions froze mid-motion. Kendall's head snapped up from her observation point, eyes widening imperceptibly at the anomaly in the telemetry feed. Her chest expanded, lungs drawing in a controlled inhale before she launched herself forward. Every step was precise, driven by muscle memory honed over years of operational deployment. 40 meters covered in seconds, her hands reached Martinez as he stumbled into the fatal line. She collided with him, her body absorbing the impact against the concrete wall. The audible pop of her shoulder dislocation echoed briefly, a mechanical punctuation marking the extremity of the stress. She rolled, cradling Martinez's torso, sliding him out of the line of fire. Blood pressure spiked, cadet vitals monitored, neural pathways firing in hyperfocus. Her fingers secured his airway, stabilized his head, all while ensuring live rounds continued their simulated path without hitting unintended targets. Hayes shouted commands, coordinating emergency procedures, but Kendall was already executing. No hesitation, no argument, only the quiet authority of someone who had survived far worse. Paul's eyes narrowed. He pointed at her, voice rising with calculated indignation. She endangered the entire exercise. She should be removed from the base immediately. His fists tightened, knuckles whitening, the exhale through his nose rapid and shallow. The words were measured for maximum repercussion, a legalistic framing of operational failure. Commander Jacobson convened an immediate review. Officers clustered, radios chirped updates, the hum of procedural oversight enveloping the space. Kendall stood at attention, shoulder visibly compromised, yet expression unbroken, breathing slow and controlled. Her jaw flexed once, a micro-adjustment compensating for pain. She didn't plead, didn't justify. Presence alone communicated competence beyond question. Chief Hayes stepped forward, voice low but firm, carrying the weight of operational authority. "Sir, she saved Cadet Martinez's life. The breach timing was wrong." Someone changed. His eyes flicked toward Paul, recognizing the pattern, the calculated interference. "I don't want excuses," Jacobson interrupted sharply, exhaling through his nose. His gaze swept the group, settling briefly on Kendall. "Morrison, you're confined to quarters, pending investigation." Dismissed. Kendall's hand flexed briefly at her side, not in defiance, but in controlled acknowledgement. She pivoted, moving toward the exit with the measured cadence of a professional whose mission extended beyond protocol. Her shoulder rotated carefully, each step a testament to muscle memory and pain tolerance. Paul's smirk returned, a small, victorious curl of the lips. Finally, he thought, a crack in the system, a chance to claim perceived superiority. But the micro-ticks along his jaw and temple betrayed the inner calculation already running. This would not go unchallenged. Hayes remained behind, observing her silhouette recede, eyes narrowing, processing not just the immediate act but the latent capability it implied. Kendall had acted outside the rules, she had broken protocol. But in that breach, she had revealed a depth of operational mastery and situational awareness that none could ignore. The compound settled into a tense silence as the officers returned to their logs and radios. Sensors recalibrated, cadets collected themselves, but the image of Kendall, posed and unflinching, remained etched into the minds of those who had witnessed the act. The exercise had ended, yet the real assessment had only begun. Chief Hayes sat at his desk long after the last cadet had cleared the training compound, the pale glow of the terminal illuminating the sharp lines of his face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, pausing as he reviewed the exercise logs for the third time. Each time-stamped, each sensor reading, was parsed with methodical scrutiny. Microsecond discrepancies leapt out at him, breaches that should have been impossible under the controlled protocol. One subtle pattern repeated. Paul's digital fingerprints were embedded in the sequence of changes, precise yet almost imperceptible. Hayes' brow furrowed. He didn't breathe noticeably, but the faint twitch of his left eyelid betrayed the cognitive spike of someone beginning to connect disparate threads. He leaned back, the chair creaking under the shift of weight. His eyes scanned the room, catching the flicker of a monitor in the corner, the empty coffee cup. Even in the quiet, every detail registered. Then he opened Kendall's personnel file. His fingers froze over the mouse. The DOD security flag glared at him. Tier 1 clearance restriction. His pulse quickened just slightly, not in panic, but in the same disciplined alertness an operator would have when confronting an unknown threat vector. He clicked through each record carefully, noting the absence of conventional career documentation. Nothing in the database matched her credentials. He picked up the secure line, The number dialed quickly, almost instinctively. The other end answered with the clip precision of someone trained in compartmentalization. "I need you to run a name for me," Hayes said, voice low but deliberate. "Kendall Morrison, civilian contractor. Something's not." A single, sharp interruption. "Stop." The voice came, flat, controlled, cutting through the static of curiosity like a scalpel. "Don't ask about her. Don't dig. She doesn't exist in any database you have clearance for." Hayes' eyes narrowed. His jaw flexed, a micro-adjustment he made unconsciously when forced to process unanticipated intelligence. He exhaled slowly, nostrils flaring barely perceptibly, then asked, "What does that mean?" "It means if she's on your base, she's there for a reason," the voice reply, measured, almost clinical. "And you don't have the clearance to know why." The line went dead, leaving a sterile silence hanging in the room. Hayes' hand drifted to his forehead, thumb brushing the fine lines etched by years of operational stress. He lowered it slowly, eyes narrowing at the blank screen. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Who is she?" The question echoed in his mind, unspoken but omnipresent. The name, the presence, the capability, it defied conventional classification, defied the protocols that had governed his entire career. His gaze shifted to Kendall's door at the far end of the barracks. The faint reflection of moonlight traced the edges of the frame. His fingers tapped lightly on the desk, the rhythm precise, an unconscious mimic of a heartbeat. He replayed the live-fire exercise in his mind, the ricochet, the dislocated shoulder, the split-second decision to save a cadet. Every procedural violation had been executed with the confidence and authority of someone with far more operational experience than a civilian contractor should possess. Hayes' eyes tracked the faint shadows beyond the window, trying to reconcile what he knew with what he saw. A civilian contractor had altered outcomes, manipulated environments, and operated with autonomy typically reserved for Tier 1 operatives. And yet, the file said nothing, no history, no assignments, no traceable deployments. Just a blacked-out clearance flag and a name that should have been invisible. He exhaled, a controlled release, shoulders shifting minutely. Every piece of his military training screamed that this was no ordinary assessment. She was embedded for a purpose beyond the understanding of most on the base. And that realization, that subtle shift in operational awareness, sent a ripple through his professional instincts. Hayes leaned back again, the chair groaning softly, and stared at Kendall's door. The faint creak of the hinges as they adjusted in the cooling night air seemed to him momentarily exaggerated. His mind traced the arc of every encounter, the precision in her observation, the clinical assessment during live-fire incidents, the composure under procedural scrutiny. Every detail aligned with a professional history he had no clearance to confirm. He straightened slightly, shoulders squared, hands resting on the desk in quiet deliberation. Whoever Kendall Morrison was, she carried a depth of operational authority that exceeded the classification of a civilian contractor. The clues were all there, encoded in behavior, in decision-making, in the micro-expressions and precision movements that betrayed a career built in shadows. Hayes allowed a single exhalation, slow and measured, before returning his gaze to the door. The question remained, unanswered yet urgent. Who is she? The corridor was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with the distant echoes of boots along polished concrete. The cadete's eyes followed Kendall as she walked, each step measured, heels clicking in precise rhythm. Her notebook was tucked under her arm, pen clipped, posture perfectly erect. Every line of her body communicated disciplined control, a professional who carried authority silently, invisibly. Paul lurked near the corner, a predator preening for the display. His lips curled in anticipation, the mockery already rehearsed in micro-expressions, a twitch of the left eyebrow, the subtle flare of nostrils, the tightening of his jaw. He leaned forward, letting the small cluster of cadettes sense the impending drama. Their murmurs were low, amused, and predatory, feeding off the tension Paul was manufacturing. He stepped into her path, the smirk widening into a thin line of derision. "Let me see that tattoo," he said, voice dripping with mockery, the words crafted for maximum humiliation. "Coordinates, what is it? Where you got your first kiss? Your favorite Starbucks?" A ripple of laughter spread among the cadettes. Paul's eyes gleamed with the reflection of perceived dominance. He knew the exact cadence to elicit embarrassment, the precise tone to make his audience lean in. He watched for a flicker, a twitch, any crack in her composure. Kendall's face remained neutral, expression locked, but her hand moved subtly, almost unconsciously, over the forearm where the ink lay hidden. Her fingers curled around the fabric of her sleeve, just enough to shield the markings without drawing attention. Her pulse was steady, breathing even, but the micro-movement of her shoulder revealed the awareness of the breach, the slight recalibration of body mechanics that only a trained operator would notice. Paul's impatience manifested in a subtle flex of his fist, the knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his sleeve. "Come on," he pressed, voice low, insistent, a predator closing the distance. "Show everyone your cute little adventure tattoo." The hallway felt taut, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The cadets shifted, silent but expectant, eyes flicking between Kendall and Paul, the silence extended, uncomfortable, a vacuum of sound that made the slightest movement audible. The tick at the corner of Paul's eye betrayed the impatience gnawing at his composure, the micro-adjustment of his shoulders showing suppressed aggression. He moved forward abruptly, closing the last half-meter, and with a swift, practiced motion, grabbed her forearm and twisted it to expose the tattoo. The ink glimmered faintly in the fluorescent light, coordinates perfectly etched, 30 for 45-23 and 69-12-47 E. Paul's lips parted in a mocking reading, the cadence deliberate, dripping sarcasm. "What's there? A beach or resort?" The echo of his voice seemed to linger, bouncing off the concrete walls. The cadets' smirks widened, some stifling laughter, others leaning forward in curiosity, sensing a spectacle about to unfold. Paul's grip remained firm, thumb pressing slightly against the skin, a tactile assertion of control. At that precise moment, the hallway door swung open. Captain Marcus Reeves entered, flanked by Admiral Richardson, the three-star SEAL legend. Reeves' gaze swept the corridor with surgical precision, taking in the postures, the expressions, the scene itself as though parsing a tactical tableau. His eyes locked on Kendall's forearm, and the air seemed to constrict. He stopped walking, a deliberate pause that carried weight far beyond motionlessness. His face drained of color almost imperceptibly, lips parting slightly, the faintest tremor at the corner of his jaw. A micro-tick betrayed recognition and involuntary response that had taken 20 years of service to reveal. The muscle memory of high-stakes operations, encoded in micro-expressions, betrayed the gravity of the moment before anyone had spoken a word. The cadets sensed the shift instantly, their collective amusement stilled, tension crystallizing in their posture. Paul's hand, still gripping her arm, froze as his peripheral vision caught the change in Reed's expression. The smirk vanished, replaced by a fraction of uncertainty, a micro-adjustment in stance, as the dynamics of power silently shifted. Kendall's eyes remained calm, professional, but a flicker of recognition passed through them, subtle as a shadow, ancient, measured, containing the weight of memory and consequence. Every muscle relaxed but primed, the quiet authority of a professional who had operated in theaters far beyond the comprehension of those around her. The hallway's fluorescent light seemed dimmer now, the sounds of boots and breathing magnified. A pause stretched long enough that it became audible. And in that stillness, the tableau was complete, the predator confronted by a force it could not quantify, the professional revealed, and the world paused, waiting for the inevitable reckoning. Captain Marcus Reeves moved as though pulled by an invisible tether, each stride measured yet imbued with a rare, almost trance-like urgency. His polished boots struck the corridor in deliberate cadence, echoing off the walls in a hollow staccato that seemed to mark time itself. His hand lifted slowly, finger trembling, as though the weight of history pressed down on the simple act of pointing. The coordinates etched into Kendall Morrison's forearm, 30 for 45-23 and 69-12-47 were no mere numbers. They were a locus of memory and sacrifice, each digit carrying the gravity of lives lost and missions etched into clandestine operational history. "Those coordinates," he whispered, voice frayed at the edges, carrying the subtle rasp of disbelief. "That's," his jaw flexed, lips parting, a micro-flicker of moisture catching at the corner of his eye. "That's where Sergeant First Class David Chen died. September 17, 2019, Operation Copper Dagger." The hallway contracted perceptually, a vacuum forming in the space between the walls and the people within it. The collective breath of cadets, instructors, and junior officers seemed to stall mid-lung expansion. Paul's smirk faltered, tightening into a thin line as the seismic shift of comprehension spread through the room. Micro-adjustments betrayed his shock, a subtle rise of his left shoulder, a barely perceptible clench of his jaw, the twitch of his eye as he registered the weight of what Reeves had just verbalized. "That operation doesn't exist in any official record," Reeves continued, voice steadying, gaining resonance with each syllable. "It was a black-level JSOC mission. Hostage rescue, high-value target. We lost 3 operators. Chen died in my arms after he took shrapnel meant for me." His eyes, once trained to sweep tactical environments, now fixed solely on Kendall, scanning her face for any trace of the woman he had known only in the abstract of operations. The micro-expressions, the faint twitching her left eyebrow, the slight tightening of her jawline registered as familiar cues to a seasoned operator. Recognition flashed in her eyes, controlled yet undeniable. "You were there," he said, voice low but resonant. The words were not a question, but a statement of recognition, a confirmation encoded in the silent language of shared operational experience. The subtle inhalation that followed, the twitch of his thumb against his index finger, underscored the unspoken acknowledgement of someone present in events meant to remain classified, buried beneath layers of blacked-out reports and compartmentalization. Kendall's jaw tightened imperceptibly, lips pressed just enough to leave a faint line, nostrils flaring slightly, a physiological indicator of measured control. "I was the mission commander, Captain, Phantom 6, the cadence of her words carried authority, clipped and precise, her posture unyielding yet disciplined, every muscle a testament to years of Tier 1 conditioning. Admiral Richardson stepped forward, boots sliding almost silently across the floor. His presence radiated calibrated authority, the subtle creak of his jacket barely audible, each step deliberate. "Commander Morrison, it's been a long time," he intoned, voice even yet charged with the weight of shared history. Paul's perception of reality tilted, the whispered hierarchies of the base, the carefully curated narratives of superiority he had believed in, now fractured. "Commander, SEAL Commander." The terminology itself carried finality. He blinked rapidly, fingers slightly splayed, the hand still extended mid-grab, frozen in disbelief. Kendall's name, spoken aloud, carried through the hallway as Richardson's voice rose just enough to resonate with everyone present. "Kendall Morrison is a SEAL commander with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She's completed 6 Tier 1 deployments, 42 successful operations, 3 Silver Stars, a Navy Cross. She's here conducting operational security assessment under deep cover." The cadence of Richardson's words struck the room like a controlled detonation, each title and credential a seismic recalibration of perceived hierarchy. Reeves snapped into immediate attention, the reflexive response of a combat-tested officer triggered by the weight of truth. The salute was exact, precise, muscles engaged in memory and discipline. "Ma'am, it's an honor," he said, voice clipped, controlled, reverent. A cascade of salutes followed, officers and cadets alike falling into the ritual of acknowledgement, an unspoken codification of respect and recognition. Paul remained frozen, hands suspended midair, the faint blanching of his knuckles a stark contrast to the room's disciplined order. Kendall accepted the salutes with minimal movement, her posture unwavering, shoulders square, eyes scanning each individual with clinical precision. Then, turning to Paul, she allowed a subtle exhalation, shoulders relaxing just enough to convey measured authority over the unfolding chaos. "Cadet," she said quietly, voice low, deliberate, each word weighted with procedural authority, "you're relieved pending disciplinary review." The syllables fell like calibrated ordnance, punctuating the conclusion of his failed assertion of control. The hallway, which had been a stage for mockery and anticipation moments earlier, now held the residual echo of vindication. The cadence of boots, the subtle shift of gazes, the micro-adjustments of those who had witnessed unvarnished truth all converged into a singular, resonant quiet. 3 days had passed since the inspection, yet the air at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center still carried the residual charge of revelation. Paul sat in the disciplinary holding area, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the sterile linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, throwing brief, stark shadows across his features. His knuckles rested on his knees, pale from repeated clenching. The realization had finally settled in. The inherited confidence, the carefully curated bravado, and the unearned smirks had amounted to nothing. His security clearance had been revoked. His uncle's phone calls went unanswered, routed into official channels that no longer afforded him any leverage. Each failed attempt only reinforced the gravity of his isolation. The quiet click of a nearby filing cabinet punctuated the silence, underscoring the absence of authority he had once assumed to wield. Meanwhile, Chief Warrant Officer Hayes approached Kendall in her quarters, the measured gait of an 18-year veteran conveying respect without ceremony. His eyes, normally scanning for operational anomalies, now softened with acknowledgement. "I suspected, ma'am," he said, voice low and formal, "but I didn't know the extent of your operational role." There was a micro-adjustment of his shoulders, a subtle exhale of relief, the kind only permitted in private. "You weren't supposed to, Chief," Kendall replied, her tone carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to operating beyond recognition. Her fingers traced the edge of her notebook, thumb brushing over the faint indentation of her notes from previous assessments. That was the point of the assessment operations. Each syllable was deliberate, her posture unyielding but devoid of theatricality. Hayes nodded, absorbing the gravity of her words without further inquiry. Commander Jacobson requested a private meeting later that morning. The office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, a subtle, human contrast to the tactical and operational precision that permeated the base. He gestured toward a chair as Kendall entered, posture erect, eyes scanning the room for exits and egress points out of habit. "Your recommendations about our training protocols," Jacobson began, voice measured and precise. "They'll be implemented across the entire special warfare community. You've made us better." His words were delivered with formal acknowledgement, yet the subtle twitch of his left eyebrow and the tightening of his jaw betrayed the rare admiration he felt for an operator who had exposed weaknesses in a system he had long considered immutable. Kendall inclined her head slightly, the gesture minimal yet respectful. "That was always the mission, sir." Her words were devoid of self-congratulation, carrying only the weight of professional duty and operational integrity. On the morning of her departure, the cadets lined the main thoroughfare of the base. Each stood at attention, eyes forward, posture rigid but voluntary. There were no commands, the respect was uncoerced, organic. As Kendall walked past, the cadence of her boots matched the unspoken rhythm of acknowledgement. Each salute rose with precision, including Martinez, whose life she had saved only a week prior. The subtle lift of his chin, the firm snap of his salute, carried gratitude and recognition beyond formal ritual. Captain Reeves fell into step beside her as she approached the gate. The wind tugged at the hem of his jacket, and he kept his gaze steady on her forearm. "Those coordinates, why tatted them?" he asked, voice low, controlled, as though speaking louder might fracture the moment. Kendall's hand moved to the ink, tracing the delicate numbers with her thumb. Her eyes briefly flicked to the horizon, a micro-expression of reflection and remembrance. "Because Chen asked me to remember." He knew he wasn't making it out. He said, "Don't let us become ghosts." Her voice held a cadence of solemn finality, the operational cadence she had maintained even in private moments. Reeves's throat tightened, a subtle quiver beneath his Adam's apple. "He's not a ghost, Commander. None of them are." "No, Captain," Kendall replied, shoulders squared, eyes forward. "They're not." She climbed into her vehicle with precise movements, the faintest shift in her spine signaling readiness, anticipation for the next operational objective. The engine started with a controlled hum, and she drove toward her next mission, every turn and acceleration measured, disciplined, professional. Behind her, the base absorbed the lesson. Quiet professionals shape the fabric of operational success without fanfare. Their work, unseen, immutable, and precise, sets the standard for those who believe visibility equates to impact. And in the sterile holding area, Paul remained seated, the understanding settling in his chest like lead. The loudest voices rarely carry the most weight. His jaw, previously slack with arrogance, tightened. His hands unclenched slowly, the action belatedly mimicking comprehension. Authority, skill, and respect were earned, not inherited. The base continued its rhythms around him, oblivious to the personal reckoning that had occurred in that small, fluorescent-lit room. If you want to witness more stories of quiet professionals and extraordinary operations, subscribe to the channel and follow the journey of those who act without recognition, leave an indelible mark.